He said the older homes.
Homes, yeah. All the homes, but a lot of Persian.
What is that?
We are on our way to the Beverly Hills Hotel, where we're going to have a dinner luncheon with the 1939 Club, named after Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939.
Yeah. There's got to be an area that's not this way where serving people that work as serving.
This is one of their annual meetings, and
this year, this is the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of liberation from camps. This year, it's a special event.
the voice that you were hearing is a former prisoner of the Ebensee concentration camp, Mr. Sam Goetz. He's a man that's responsible for my wife and I being here today.
Oh, this is something. What are these things?
Now look at this.
No, they would.
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing? I've seen that.
They're not inexpensive.
They have a motor in it?
A beautiful day here in Los Angeles today.
They're expensive, I think.
October 30th, 2005.
This is Sunset Boulevard.
Sunset Boulevard there.
It's a famous Sunset Boulevard. I don't know, did you ever see the movie Sunset Boulevard with William Holden?
Probably long time
Oh,
ago.
well, that's in 60s, yeah, 50s. That's powerful.
Back then we
I saw
had
it on
the
TV
swans.
the other day.
With Gloria Swanson.
Yeah.
I believe that this hotel is still owned
Get into Chicago.
by the king of Brunei,
We go into
you know, one of the
somewhere
richest
called
men in the
Lombard,
world. I think they
about
still
5
own it.
times a year.
Brunei,
From
that's
to,
down in,
well,
I don't know,
we just went in
Chic
October
something.
now. There's a group of maybe 18 guys that live around there. They call it the Chicago group. And we still meet for luncheon.
Right.
And it takes us about
beautiful
an hour and a half
place.
to drive in.
Oh yeah, it's one of these old mansions. I mean, the movie stars, everybody else hangs around.
Here's Mr. Goetz, standing beside the sign that says the 1939 Club.
The only ones that I got. Stop still. Of the first
Goetz.
Better way to spend a Sunday afternoon than with 320 of my best friends. We had a turn-away crowd this afternoon. We just couldn't accommodate everybody who wanted to be accommodated. And that, of course, is testament to Bob Persinger and his fellow GIs. His wife, Issa, who is...
The Bill had spoken about before, and those videos are about to be, and some of them are already on our website. In 1987, Dr. Goetz was appointed to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum to be part of the 15-member Content Committee. He served on that committee until 1993. From 1995 to 1999, he was the chairman of the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum. He also chaired the ADL Holocaust Education Committee from that time until now. And most recently, he was appointed for a 2-year term by the Speaker of the California Assembly to be on the Commission for Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights. It's a state advisory board. In addition to all of these other activities, he's an active optometrist, and I can speak from my own experience because he's my optometrist. And he also provides free eye care for the disadvantaged through the free clinic. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sam Goetz.
Thank you, Susan, for very kind words. Let me begin, first of all. I would like to acknowledge 2 members of the 3rd generation who visited with myself and my wife the camp that you're listening to about the liberation of it last year, my house in Ebensee, and the town where I work. In addition to that, those 2 members of the 3rd generation visited the area of Italy, and the mountains of Abruzzo, where my wife survives a 12-year-old girl. Those are Justin Penn and Alexa Penn, our grandchildren. Would you please stand up? Excuse me. Having said that, let me give you a brief information about myself. What Susan said was after the war. Let me tell you essentially what happened to me in 1939. Okay. My formative years, from the age of 11 to 16, were actually determined, influenced by the Nazi occupation of Europe, which lasted for me 5.5 years. There were many defining moments during those 5.5 years. I will address myself very quickly to some, because I would like to introduce then our guests. 1939 to 40, 41, 42. The first defining moment came when I had to put a Star of David, which was 10 centimeters long. I had no idea why I had to do it. My parents never explained it to me. Did I know that Middle Ages Jews wore something like that? I did not. And in addition to that traumatic experience, which for 11-year-old boy was, I was unable to go to school. And for the next 2 years, I was deprived of everything that a young person needs. Couldn't go to a movie, couldn't play in the park, couldn't meet my friends, no bicycles. Essentially, till 1942, this was the beginning, which some of you are familiar with, of humiliation, deprivation, and for a young boy like myself, obviously, it affected my life to some extent. 1942, however, was the very defining year for me. On my 14th birthday, that particular week, saw the deportation of most of the members of my family, actually all of them. It was June 15, 1942. Most of them perished in the gas chambers of Persinger. So from then on, I was all by myself, and then came the other experience of labor camp and 3 years in a concentration camp. I will spare you the details of life in a concentration camp. You all have heard about it. Many of you experienced it. But briefly, let me tell you this. South of Berlin, I was exposed for the first time to work in the tunnel, where I became an expert on air hammers. I used an air hammer to break the stone so we could move in and build the tunnel. Soon after, we had to move out of that area because of the Russians' front being coming towards that direction. So we moved from the area of Berlin with a dead march for 3 weeks towards Austria, and Mauthausen was my next stop. Mauthausen, and then in Saarbrücken, Ebensee, where again I was assigned to do work in the tunnel. Again, there's a story about these tunnels. They're very famous in that sense, that the tunnel in Ebensee was supposed to replace Peenemünde, when Peenemünde was bombed. There's a major book on the subject written in German called Cement Factory Ebensee. At any rate, the final defining moment in my life was on May 6, 1945. And this is where I would like to read to you my impression of that morning, and then of course the man to whom I am very grateful that he came on time. Okay, May 6, 1945. This is a day forever etched in my memory. For the first time in 3 years, I was neither awakened by a blood leader, nor did my body receive any blows. It was a beautiful Sunday morning. The spring was in the air. Now this is an area not far from Salzburg. The sky was clear and blue. I crossed the dreaded Rollco Square which we used to call Appellplatz. And there was an eerie silence on the square, normally punctuated by the screams of the SS. I was unable to comprehend the enormity of the Sunday morning. With my sudden change, with my body weakened and my mind unable to respond positively to this change in the routine, essentially, I made my way to the main gate of the camp. The time was approximately 1 o'clock. There were very few people there. The camp gate was closed. There were still machine guns on the towers, manned this time by older Austrian, probably World War I soldiers, because the SS left the main towers. As I was standing at the gate, one of the SS men, without his insignia, but he had some kind of a green German army coat, approached 4 of us and he told us, "You come with me." We were taken to what they referred to actually was the Wachstube, which essentially is the guardhouse, 30 feet away from the gate, where the Nazis would watch us, count us as we move out, make sure that we are in a single row and so on. In that particular building, there were many weapons. There were machine guns, hand grenades, and we were advised and told, move these things out of here into the backyard. There was a large window in this particular guardhouse. There was a clock also on the wall. As I was working there for probably an hour, an unbelievable sight of a tank moving up the hill, followed by another tank. The first one made a sharp right turn. I saw a man who emerged from the tank. I was not sure whether this was an illusion, a dream, but soon after I realized, yes, it was real. The man was Bob Persinger, whom I will introduce in a minute. I did not know his name. I did not know if he's alive till May 16 of 2005. Bob Persinger was invited to speak in Ebensee. He was a keynote speaker on that 60th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. Through a variety, I don't want to take the time to explain to you how that happened. He had my name, he called me, and I got a 3-page email from him on May 16, and we are in touch ever since. Who is Bob Persinger, whom we're going to meet in a minute? Sergeant Bob Persinger was a member of the 3rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Group. He entered service in 1943. There were 5 siblings in the family, 2 girls, 3 boys. He was the oldest. He could have been exempted, deferred from the draft. Yet, since he was the only breadwinner, his father died in 1939. Yet, he decided to volunteer. In July of 1944, he crossed the Atlantic. A few months later, he found himself in the Battle of the Bulge, the southern flank, and finally made his way up to Luxembourg, towards Austria, and on May 5th, 1945, he was in a place which was familiar to me, not far from Munden, and on May 6th, at 2:30 in the afternoon, I looked through that window, and his tank, the first tank, made a right turn, and he emerged, and he looked to me like a giant, although he claims I was short. At any rate, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the man who liberated 18,000 people in his first tank on May 6, 1945, Bob Persinger.
Mr. and Mrs. Alpern, Mr. and Mrs. It is my extreme honor and pleasure to be with all of you today. I was thrilled when I was asked by Mr. Goetz to come here and talk about the events that took place in my life 60 years ago. I must tell you, I met this man for the first time just yesterday. It was the last in May when I returned to Ebensee for the 60th year anniversary of the liberation of the terrible camp located up in the hills above that little town in the Alp Mountains. I was surrounded by survivors as I was preparing to talk about how we entered the camp 60 years prior, May 6, 1945. I heard a voice telling me that I should call this man when I returned home. And at the same moment, I saw a business card in front of me, but I never did see who gave it to me. It was Mr. Goetz's business card, given to me by his friend that he had given to me it was, and when I returned home, I called and contacted him. I was thrilled to hear from him and a little about his life in the camp. Our later conversations and email made me feel as though I had been acquainted with this man, and I surely wanted to meet him in person. So here I am to tell you about what happened 60 years ago. Before that, however, in that terrible concentration camp known as Ebensee, in March 1943, at the age of 19, I entered the Army, which was entirely different and a challenge to me. I entered the Army and feeling that I should do my very best, and however, along with millions of others, we knew that we must defeat Hitler and the Japanese Emperor Hirohito in order to save the world. The 13 weeks of Army basic training went fast. We were in Camp Gordon, Georgia, and I was proud to be in the U.S. 3rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. It was an old outfit. It was formed in 1846 and had a long and distinguished record. They had such names as Jonathan Windwright, George Patton as their past regimental commanders. We knew that we were in a proud outfit and we wanted to hold that tradition. After maneuvers in November and December of 1943 and January of 1944 in Tennessee, and a month-long firing on the ranges in South Carolina, we were ready for overseas duty at the young ages of 19, 20, and 21 years old. We left the port in New York in July on a British ship in a large convoy headed for Liverpool, England. We sailed past the Statue of Liberty and we wondered when we would see her again. I remember this gave me a sad and lonely feeling, as it did with many of the troops. After arriving in Liverpool, we traveled to Southampton area to receive our new tanks and get ready to cross the channel to France. We were briefed every day about the war situation. We continued with our military drill and exercise to keep in shape. Daily life was just about the same, but we became more apprehensive about what was going to take place. We prepared to load our tanks on an LST, which is a landing ship tank, in Southampton, England. And then on August the 7th, we landed on Utah Beach in France. The Battle of St. Lo had just ended, and we joined the 3rd Army there for our breakout across France. I well remember our first mission, which was to advance along a road with hedgerows on each side to a small village. We fired our machine guns to each side as we advanced along this road to prevent our armor-piercing fire from bazookas. Finally, getting to the village, we discovered a roadblock and an anti-tank gun set up nearby. We were able to destroy it, and we then bypassed the village and continued on our way. I do remember being very scared, and I wondered how we could live through this pressure every day until the war was over. Life had changed for all of us, and however, we learned to accept it. A few days after that, the Germans were retreating fast, and by the first week in September, we were almost across France, and the battle for the city of Metz was near. We now had to contend with very long periods of rain, making everything so much harder. The Germans' resistance stiffened, and that battle for Metz lasted into November, until it finally was captured by the American forces. After that, we were on the banks of the Moselle River, which divides France and Germany. It was in this area where we performed many night patrols to try to capture German prisoners, to get information on as to what resistance was ahead. We crossed the Moselle River and eventually the Siegfried Line. Often this brought machine gun fire and mortar fire. In the meantime, the rains continued. It was at this time we had to put extension on our tank treads to make sure they were wider so they wouldn't sink in the mud. We were now very close to the Siegfried Line, and it was well defended with large cement pieces staggered and about 3 feet high, and dividing the two countries. These were known as Dragon's Feet. That's what we called them. Gun emplacements were always guarding the open roads that did lead into the villages. Our offense was stalled, and we now were on the defense. With lots of patrolling day and night, the Germans were doing patrolling also. This brought lots of artillery and mortar fire, which we received on our front. The weather became much colder with sleet and snow. It was a dreary time, putting up with the weather and all of the incoming artillery and mortar fire. We were at a stalemate. Then on the 16th day of December, the Battle of the Bulge began on the 1st Army front north of us. General Patton pulled out some of his armored divisions, and that left us with a wide front covering his right flank. The Germans' attacks were not as severe as they were concentrating on the north of us. However, we were under mortar fire and heavy artillery day after day. We received lots of snow, and the temperatures dropped well below zero. It was one of Germany's coldest winters on record. After the Bulge, we started to advance toward the Rhine River. Between August and this time, we had a number of casualties, and I had lost some wonderful friends. I will never forget the time when we had 5 tanks destroyed near Trier, Germany in just minutes, and 5 men were killed and a large number seriously wounded. Air reconnaissance reported that the wooded area was clear, but when we came near the heavy woods, 2 concealed 88mm anti-tank guns opened fire at point-blank range. That was one of the worst engagements of us we had during the war. We finally crossed the Rhine on a pontoon bridge as the main bridge was destroyed by the Germans. We soon broke through their lines and made huge advances day after day. The German army had collapsed, and we were turned south and east towards Czechoslovakia and then into Austria. There were pockets of resistance here and there. However, German soldiers surrendered in droves, and we told them to continue to go west as we were going east to link up with the Russians. On May 5th, 1945, we engaged a number of Hungarian soldiers that were in the German army near the town of Volkenbruck, Austria. They destroyed one of our tanks and killed 2 of the crew. To my knowledge, this was the last 2 casualties by the enemy to our squadron. That evening, we advanced to a town of Gmunden and spent the night there. This was on the north end of a big Lake Tronisee, which was between Gmunden and Ebensee. The next morning, we were given the mission to proceed to Ebensee. Our tank platoon was to work with a reconnaissance troop. We were very cautious because of the trouble of the previous day. There were a lot of curves in this mountain road that followed along the lake for 15 miles to Ebensee. We arrived there with no problem, and no Nazi soldiers defending the town. It was one of the most beautiful lakes we had ever seen, situated on this beautiful lake surrounded by the Alps. The rest of the company soon arrived, and our Captain Brennan told the proprietors of the Post Hotel that we were going to take it over and we would be staying there as long as we were in Ebensee. Our reconnaissance platoon soon discovered the camp and reported it to our squadron commander, who in turn requested that tanks were to be used to go to the gates. It was not long after that I received my last mission in World War II. Little did I realize that I would be doing something, the memories of which would stay with me as long as I live. A climax of all of the action from combat. The mission was to take my tank and another to the gates of Ebensee and report back before we entered. I do remember that it was a warm sunny day and spring was in the air. We traveled up the winding gravel road with caution, not knowing what to expect. As we turned the corner, we saw the camp entrance gates. There were very strong smells that almost made you sick, and the inmates looked like ghosts behind those barbed wires. There was no resistance, and we later learned that the SS had left the day before. But as Mr. Goetz said, there was what we called, and they were known as the Volkssturm. It was a civilian army. These men were given rifles and bazookas to help defend their country. I reached down as we got near the gate, and I picked the rifle from this soldier, this German soldier, and I broke it over the tank turret. That time there was a tremendous roar, and as we were approaching the camp, there was just so much happiness. We couldn't believe, and you couldn't. It was like the music here. You couldn't talk, and for a while, we were amazed. We saw then a scene that is almost impossible to describe. Some of you have read my story, but for those of you who haven't, I must say that we were looking at scenes that were unbelievable, what man was doing to his fellow man. We stopped our tanks on the roll call square and just observed for a long time the terrible scenes before us. We were looking at thousands of men who were skin and bones, maybe weighing 70 to 75 pounds. They were standing in mud that was almost ankle deep, dressed in their striped garments, some with just the trousers, some with just the top, and some with nothing at all. However, there was so much singing and crying for joy that it was hard to take it all in. We passed out all of the rations we had, so a few received a treat that they never would forget, and we felt bad when our rations were depleted. A prisoner by the name of Max Garcia, who spoke English and convinced both crews to follow him around so he could show us more of the camp. These poor souls, as sick and weak as they were, wanted to touch and hug us to show that their thanks that somebody was here to try and help them. And we were surrounded by them. We walked among the corpses lying here and there on our way to the barracks, to the kitchen area that was bare, the area that was supposed to be a hospital, and into the crematorium where bodies were stacked like cordwood all around the walls. If you weren't sick and crying by now, you would be before you exited. We returned to the hotel and we knew we must get food there as soon as possible. We were mentally and physically wore out. However, plans were being made already to do something about feeding them. The following morning, we had started collecting the vegetables, including potatoes and anything we could use to make a soup from the surrounding countryside. Any kind of bread and food from stores throughout the area was gathered. That evening, we had a large amount of soup ready to be served along with the bread that we had collected. Now we had the problem of controlling all of them. We knew they would be uncontrollable, so we used 2 tanks with their machine guns to fire live ammunition over their heads to get their attention and control them when they started to overrun the food line. Many gulped the food so fast they would be screaming in agony and became very ill, and some died on the spot. The Army moved in very soon with food for those poor starving individuals, and the hospital units followed with medical help which was so desperately needed. We were there for another week until we were called to move south to help quell an uprising by Marshal Tito. However, that didn't amount to much, as the U.S. Army and Italy took care of that. May 19, 1945, General Patton came to visit us. Our 3rd Cavalry had a birthday. It was 99 years old that day. Of course, he told us how proud he was of his old outfit. He also told us that we were going home for a 30-day furlough, and when we returned, he would be glad to lead us into Japan. We were very happy when they dropped the atomic bombs, so we did not have to follow him to Japan, and we were soon giving our discharges from the service. At this time, I'd like to read a portion of my letter from my company commander, Captain Brennan, who is now deceased. He wrote this letter to his wife and son concerning the camp. He writes, "Dear Vera and Timmy, well, the European war is over, and I don't feel any different. I take that back. I do know that no one is shooting at me, but we ran into something the last day of the war that is enough to change a man's outlook on life. It is a good story, so I will try and tell it with some sort of continuity. On the last day of the war, we were still going like hell, which has been a habit since we crossed the Rhine. My company was ordered to move into an Austrian town and hold it. We moved into the town against no opposition. The people of the town were half hysterical, and I thought this was odd because normally the Austrians and the Germans had no fear whatsoever of American troops. I found the reason in a little while. In the hills, just outside the town, existed one of the infamous concentration camps you read about in the paper and usually pay no attention to because you cannot imagine such things existing in a civilized world. This place held about 18,000 people, and it was the most vile, stinking place in the world. People were dying at the rate of 300 a day from malnutrition. A large crematorium, which could burn 8 bodies at a time, was kept busy 24 hours a day. When I arrived at the camp, there were 400 bodies in the crematory to be burned and more in the barracks that had not been collected. The big problem was food, so we closed all of the stores and bakeries in towns to the civilians and started baking for the camp. I sent a call to the squadron commander and all of the troops in the squadron to do the same thing. Fortunately, the camp cooks were cooperative, and we soon had the kitchen organized. Then we discovered that the SS had destroyed the water system so that we had no water in the camp. That meant all water had to be hauled in by buckets, cans, or whatever we could find. This took a long time, and I could go on about the obstacles we had to climb, but finally we had a thick soup and some bread ready, at least enough to feed some of them a good meal. Compared to what they were accustomed to, this meal was a banquet. There were about 12 children ranging in age from 11 to 14 years of age, and these were immediately adapted by my men and brought down into the town, scrubbed, dressed, fed, and considered memories of our company. Some of these children had been in concentration camps for 4 years and had completely forgotten civilian life. Men from all walks of life were in the camp, doctors, lawyers, priests, artists, musicians, and peasants. You could not distinguish one from another, as they all looked alike, and they all fight for food. For even one day without food leaves them in such a weakened condition they are unfit to fight for it the next day. And that leads it to the building next to the crematorium. When our chaplain heard about the clergy in the camp, he made arrangements to have them evacuated immediately. I brought to my headquarters a famous concert pianist and a violinist. The pianist wept like a child when he was allowed to play, and even 6 years in the concentration camp was not enough to kill his genius. He played for me, and it was beautiful. The following day I discovered a famous Polish artist, and he asked me if I would allow him to paint me in oils. I procured him the best oil colors in Austria, and I now have a portrait in oils that is almost life-size from the waist. It is a beautiful painting. The letter continues, but I wanted you to hear some of it as how it relates to my memories of the camp. Our 3rd Cavalry Veterans Group in World War II has met annually for 58 consecutive years. And we have had a large number of concentration camp survivors that attend to tell about their life in Ebensee. It is unbelievable as to how they have succeeded in life and how they have become such respectable people no matter where they are located. As for me, like you, there have been flashbacks of my life from childhood to the present. Ebensee comes back and comes back. I can still see their eyes gazing at me and feel their crying need for help. And I've often thought how many lives we might have saved if we could have gotten there earlier. I have told this story to a lot of people and young adults as to how terrible life in a concentration camp was and how so many of the survivors have gone to a very productive life after all of this suffering. So to all you survivors of the camp, I know you will go to heaven, for you certainly have lived part of your life in hell. I will always remember you, and I thank you with all of my heart for giving me the privilege to be here with you for this memorial occasion and to meet you. I wear this pin as a constant reminder that says, never again. May God bless you.
It is the one instrument that hasn't changed over 5,000 years. It is blown to announce important events, and it is said that it was sounded at the giving of the 10 Commandments to Moses at Mount Sinai. But this is not the same shofar. In Leviticus it is written, "Then you shall transmit a blast on the horn and proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." It is a symbol of liberty, and we present it to a man who, along with his fellow GIs, liberated our people in our darkest hour. The inscription reads, "To Robert Persinger, an American liberator of Nazi concentration camps, with eternal gratitude, the members of the 1939 Club, a Holocaust Survivors Organization." And we're going to ask Cantor Wallfish, in honor of this occasion, to blow the shofar. And in fairness to the cantor, this is a brand new shofar, and usually it takes quite a while to practice with it. So he's going to give it his best.
I thought you knew that voice, the shepherd. Lots of voice.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, it is our custom to dance the hora with our guest of honor. So the orchestra is up here, and please join us on the dance floor. And dessert is also being served.
It is the most beautiful hotel in Los Angeles, also the oldest, and it's been around for many, many, many different occasions. The 1939 Club holds their luncheons here all the time. So this is very special, and there must be a wedding happening because they decorated it with so many beautiful things. And straight ahead is where they have high tea. And all beautiful women come. There's a wedding dress.
Yes, ma'am. Now you have to just...
Oh, yeah. There's a wedding going on downstairs, and this tree was brought in along with the flowers just for this occasion. So you can see as you walk down, keep walking and filming. There's a step. There's a step and another step and another step. And just go ahead, film this as you go down. Look at this.
Isn't that wild?
Look at that. That was all put there for the wedding. This is all for the wedding. Now you can turn around and take this side. I would just video.
Oh yes,
Just go for it. It's a very special place.
What's that? It's like on the floor.
Now it's come time to leave this beautiful place.
There we are.